I put the K-1 on the glass conference table and asked the banker why a dying fund had paid $4.8 million in management fees to a company my husband swore he did not control. Nobody in the room moved right away. The paper was cream-colored, thick enough to feel expensive, with a red tab I had added before leaving the apartment. I had spent most of the cab ride to Alder Private Bank with my thumb pressed against that tab, as if the page might lose its courage before I found mine. Victor sat across from me in a steel blue suit, one hand loosely folded over the bridge-guaranty packet he had wanted me to sign. Owen Pike, the relationship executive who spoke in the hushed, careful way private bankers do when they are deciding whose version of reality will cost them less, looked down at the line I had already highlighted. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, buying time with politeness, "the fee line you are referring to is connected to Caro Bridge Advisory." "I know the company name," I said. "What I do not know is why my husband's failing fund was still paying it millions while I was being asked to secure the emergency bridge line with my separate property trust." Victor leaned back as if my question were theater instead of danger. "Elena," he said, and even then he sounded patient, almost indulgent, "you are reading restructuring noise as if it were distributable cash." That was his gift. He could make a woman feel naive with nothing but tone. But Owen had already taken the second document from my folder. It was the beneficial ownership filing Mara had told me to print in duplicate, because men like Victor only respected paper once it had witnesses. Owen scanned the filing, paused at the line that mattered, and read it again more slowly. "Control person," he said. "Victor Sterling." The room changed. It did not explode. Men in expensive rooms almost never do. It shifted. Reed Talbot, Victor's counsel, stopped flipping through his binder. Victor's jaw tightened just once before he arranged his face back into the expression that had persuaded boards, donors, and reporters that aggression was just another form of clarity. And Owen Pike did something more dangerous than either of those things. He stopped looking at my husband and started looking only at the documents. "Before we continue," I said, because once I had opened the door I was not willing to let Victor close it with vocabulary, "I would also like the bank to see Appendix D in the bridge packet. The one assigning advisory fee protections to Caro Bridge before any guarantee exposure touches my trust." Reed lifted his head. "That appendix requires context." "No," I said. "It requires reading." I could feel Victor's eyes on me then, not warm, not admiring, not even angry in the ordinary marital sense. What I felt was the cold recognition of a man who suddenly understood that the woman he had planned around had walked into the room with a record he could not charm away. 6 weeks earlier, I still thought I was being asked to save my marriage. I did not know I was being asked to finance the version of my husband's future that did not include me. "My name is Elena Rhodes Sterling." I was 39 years old, married for 8 years, and old enough to know the sound a lie makes when it is wrapped in business language and delivered as responsibility. Before I married Victor, I worked in investor relations for a boutique advisory firm that handled wealthy clients who thought discretion was a moral achievement. I was never the woman on stage and never wanted to be. I was the woman fixing the wording in quarterly letters, smoothing rough edges before they reached people with enough money to make rough edges expensive. I understood tone. I understood timing. I understood what powerful men hide when they call something technical. That was part of why Victor loved me in the beginning. He liked that I could hear weakness in a sentence before the room did, polish his message, and make his aggression sound like clarity. Victor ran Sterling Point Partners, an activist investment firm built on the mythology that he cut through waste and exposed weak management. In private he believed control belonged to the person willing to move first and explain later. The Rhodes Legacy Trust was the one thing in my adult life that did not pass through Victor's language before it became real. My mother set it up the year she learned her cancer would not be cured. She had never been rich in the way Victor's world defined rich, but she had sold her share of a medical services company at the right time and spent the next decade building one careful wall after another around the money. She loved me in a practical way. Not softly. Not sentimentally. She loved me the way women who grew up without safety tend to love their daughters. She loved me by making sure no man could call my future an emotional decision if paper could make it an enforceable one. When she died, the trust became mine in stages, a separate property instrument with boring language and life-changing force. Victor always called it, your mother's fortress, with that half-smile he used when he wanted to sound admiring while really meaning inconvenient. The first time Victor mentioned the bridge line, we were in the kitchen on a Tuesday night while rain tapped against the windows and the apartment felt smaller than usual because he had brought tension home before taking off his coat. He poured sparkling water into a glass and did not drink it. The fund has a temporary liquidity problem, he said. Temporary. Another elegant word. Temporary because? I asked. Because 2 exits slipped, one portfolio company is taking longer to refinance, and a few people panicked at exactly the wrong time. He waved one hand. It is noise. But banks react to noise if you let them. I leaned against the counter and waited. Being married to Victor had taught me that the real ask always arrived 3 sentences after the setup. Alder is extending a short-term bridge while we clean up the timeline, he said. Routine, except they want additional family support optics because they know the press likes pretending every fund wobble is a death spiral. Family support optics. Contingent guarantee language, he said more plainly. 90 days. It will never be called. Against what? He finally looked at me. The trust. I laughed once because it was such a clean animal response to danger that I did not have time to disguise it. No. Victor did not get angry. That would have been easier. He smiled like a man correcting a scheduling misunderstanding. Elena, listen to the full structure. I heard enough structure. You heard one noun and panicked. There it was. Not disagreement. Female panic. He came closer and lowered his voice, the way he did when he wanted intimacy to do the work pressure could not. I am not asking you to give me your trust, he said. I am asking you to stand beside me for 90 days while I stop a liquidity rumor from becoming a market event. Families act first. Outsiders talk later. Families act first. It sounded noble if you ignored the fact that he had placed me in the sentence where collateral usually lived. If this is routine, I said, why do you need my mother's money anywhere near it? Because Alder wants a clean confidence signal. Then let them take one from the fee income. He looked at me for half a beat too long. What fee income? At the time, I thought the pause meant exhaustion. Now I know it was the first hairline crack in a performance he still believed I would not examine. Victor, I said, your firm charges management fees. That is not a radical accusation. The fund-level cash situation is not the same as firm compensation. Do not flatten the structure because you dislike the optics. Flatten the structure. He always used language like that when he wanted to imply I lacked the altitude to understand him. Then he softened again. I know what that trust means to you, he said. I also know you understand what it means when a wife is the only person still capable of signaling absolute confidence. If I wanted help from my mother or from one of the co-investors, I could get it. That is not the point. The point is what it says if my own home will not stand behind me. He was good. Even now I can admit that. He did not ask for money. He asked for narrative. For symbolism. For loyalty dressed up as market psychology. And because I had spent years helping him build narratives for other people's consumption, part of me understood exactly why he wanted mine. I still said no. At least I said no that night. 3 days later he brought home the first draft of the bridge materials and spread them across the dining table as if inviting me into responsible partnership. "Read them," he said. "I want you comfortable." That should have reassured me. Instead it made me more careful. Comfortable is a word men use when they want the conclusion before the reading. I took the packet to my office, shut the door, and started exactly where I always start when I suspect someone wants my signature more than my comprehension. Definitions. Exposure language. Side letters. Schedules. Appendices. The body of the document was polished, almost too polished, the financial equivalent of a beautifully staged room. There were paragraphs about temporary dislocation, confidence stabilization, limited recourse, family support alignment. The phrase contingent guarantor appeared 3 times before I found the first sentence blunt enough to tell the truth. If certain collateral thresholds were not met within the bridge period, Alder could pursue the guarantor's pledged trust assets up to a stated cap. Not me in theory. My mother's trust in practice. I kept reading. There was something else that bothered me before I could name it. Every part of the document that described Victor's distress was clear. Every part that described the money still protected from that distress was abstract. Excluded streams. Preserved advisory arrangements. Pre-existing contractual income. The paper had all the familiar fingerprints of a man who had learned how to bury the important sentence under cleaner ones. When I asked Victor about it over dinner, he cut his C-base into perfect pieces and never once looked defensive. "Those are ordinary carve-outs," he said. "Banks do not collateralize operating structures they do not need." Why is advisory income protected before my trust is? Because it is not the same bucket. Is it your bucket? He set down his fork. I need you to decide whether we are having a marriage conversation or an accounting conversation. They seem connected. Only because you are letting fear create pattern where there is only process. I knew then that he had no intention of answering plainly. I also knew something worse. He believed that would be enough. For the next week, the bridge line became the third presence in our apartment. Victor rotated through every argument available to men like him: the payroll argument, the headlines argument, the loyalty argument. One night he told me, "I am not asking for trust in me. I am asking for trust in what we are." That line might have worked if I had not spent years watching him treat shared identity as a tool he deployed when independent judgment inconvenienced him. I asked for our full tax packet the following Monday. That was not suspicious behavior. I had always handled our tax binders because Victor found them tedious and because men like my husband prefer wives who can organize the administrative spine of wealth without calling it labor. The family office usually sent a clean digital package first and paper copies later. Our controller, Nina, forwarded the file before noon with a short message: all statements attached for review before signer pages. I opened the packet at my desk expecting boredom. Instead I found the K-1. If you have never seen one, a K-1 is the kind of tax form designed to make ordinary people stop reading. Dense lines. Cold labels. Boxes that assume expertise. It is also, sometimes, a receipt for a lie. The K-1 came from Sterling Point Opportunities Fund 3, the very fund Victor had called impaired, constrained, temporarily underwater, too fragile to reassure a bank without my mother's trust standing behind it. I stared at one line until the words stopped being symbols and became accusation. Management fees paid to Caro Bridge Advisory LLC. $4.8 million. I read it again. Then a third time. The amount did not need interpretation to wound me. It needed interpretation to explain itself, but not to wound. I knew enough to understand that a fund supposedly gasping for air was still paying millions somewhere. I also knew enough to understand that Victor had never once mentioned Caro Bridge to me in any meaningful way. I carried the printed page home in my bag and waited until he got back from dinner with one of his partners. He loosened his tie in the foyer and kissed my cheek as if we were a normal couple ending a normal day. I handed him the K-1. What is Caro Bridge? Victor glanced down, then up again so quickly an untrained woman might have missed the recognition. An advisory entity. Yours? Affiliated. You told me the fund had no room left to stabilize itself. That is not what this line means. Then tell me what it means. He exhaled through his nose. Elena, please do not do this after midnight with tax paper and moral outrage. Is it fee income or not? It is contractual management compensation attached to legacy oversight functions. In English. He looked at me then with open irritation, and for the first time I could feel the contempt beneath the polish. In English, he said, it means you found a line item and decided that because money exists somewhere in the structure, all cash inside the ecosystem is interchangeable. It is not. Is Caro Bridge yours? It is controlled. By you. By the platform. That answer told me everything. Not because it clarified the structure, but because it was the kind of answer men give when the truth is dangerous in its simplest form. Were you going to tell me about it before asking me to risk the trust? I was going to tell you what mattered. There are moments in marriage when betrayal announces itself without needing proof beyond a single sentence. Not full betrayal. Not the whole map. But enough of it that your body registers the truth before your mind is ready to narrate it. I did not sleep beside him that night. I took a blanket to the library and sat with the K-1 until dawn pushed gray light against the windows and the line on the page began to feel less like paper and more like a hand around my throat. My mother had built the trust because she knew women can disappear inside successful men long before they realize they are being edited out. She was not suspicious by temperament. She was prepared by experience. When my father's business collapsed, she learned what happens when the person with the better tone also has the better story. Assets move. Memory gets rewritten. Contribution becomes support. Support becomes gratitude. Gratitude becomes silence. I had promised myself Victor would never turn me into a graceful footnote in a life I had helped finance. And yet there I was at 4 a.m, holding proof that he had asked for my safety while hiding his own money in language he assumed would discourage me from reading. At 9 I called Mara Ellison. Another wife had once told me, if you ever need someone who can translate paper into motive, call Mara before you call a man who says he can explain it. She wore charcoal suits and the expression of a woman who had spent years watching rich men confuse opacity with sophistication. I laid the K-1 on her desk. My husband says his flagship fund is in distress, I said. He wants a 90-day bridge guarantee backed by my separate property trust. This line says the fund paid $4.8 million in management fees to Caro Bridge Advisory. He says that is not real liquidity and that I am flattening the structure. Mara did not smile. Good, she said. Good. Good that he used language that hard, because men only lean that hard on abstraction when the plain version hurts them. She read the K-1 once, then again, marking nothing, only slowing at the fee line. Do you need the accounting lecture, she asked, or the Betrayal translation? Start with Betrayal. Gladly. If he told you the fund was too fragile to face the bank without your trust standing behind him, then the most important question is not whether every dollar in the structure is technically interchangeable. The question is whether he hid a protected income stream while asking you to expose the only money in your life he cannot otherwise reach. I sat very still. That is what this looks like, she said. And if Caro Bridge is controlled by him, not openly disclosed to you, and carved out from creditor pain before your trust is, then the emotional truth is simple. He did not come to you last because you are his partner. He came to you because your money is clean, your loyalty is useful, and your trust would absorb pain while his protected fees keep breathing elsewhere. That was the moment I stopped feeling merely alarmed and started feeling insulted at the bone. Can we prove it? I asked. Probably, Mara said. But we do it in order. First we read everything he expected you to skim. I forwarded the bridge packet. She asked for every appendix, schedule, and side letter. That afternoon Victor texted me 3 times. Need your answer by Thursday. Do not let consultants poison a family issue. We are creating damage where there did not need to be any. I did not reply. Mara called at 6. Appendix D, she said without greeting. That is where he buried it. She emailed me a marked copy while she talked. The appendix described protected advisory streams tied to pre-existing management arrangements. Caro Bridge Advisory was named twice. Not explained. Named. The document preserved those streams outside the collateral waterfall and before any contingent recourse could touch my trust. So he protected Caro Bridge first, I said. Yes. And then came to me. Yes. There is a very specific kind of nausea that comes when the document says exactly what your instincts feared. It is not surprise. It is recognition arriving with legal force. Next step, Mara said, we trace who owns Caro Bridge. Victor countered before we finished the trace. That night he came home earlier than usual carrying takeout from the restaurant we used to order from when we still believed comfort had its own innocence. He set the bags on the counter and looked at me with exhausted concern, the husband of the year, the public man privately burdened. I heard from Nina that you requested duplicate entity schedules from the tax packet, he said. I requested our tax packet. The duplicates came with it. You went to someone. I went to paper. He laughed once without humor. Elena, there are predatory people who make their living telling wives that complexity is abuse. And there are husbands who make their living turning abuse into complexity. Something flashed across his face then. Not guilt. Offense. You are behaving like an adversary. You asked me to sign like an asset. He took a step closer. Do not do this. Do not let fear and outside voices turn a manageable liquidity event into marital theater. I am trying to protect what we built. What we built, I said softly, or what you moved away from me. For the first time since this began, he dropped the patient tone. You do not understand enough to use that sentence responsibly. Then help me understand. In one sentence. Does Caro Bridge belong to you? He was quiet long enough to make the answer obvious. It is a controlled advisory vehicle, he said at last. That you did not disclose before asking for the trust. Because the trust request was about confidence, not a liquidation analysis. No, I said. It was about who bleeds first. He picked up the takeout bags and dropped them back down harder than necessary. Thursday, he said. I need your answer by Thursday. If Alder senses hesitation, it becomes a signal. Maybe it should. He left the kitchen without eating. The next morning I found out how he punished resistance. My access to the family office portal failed, the joint approval channel tightened, and staff suddenly sounded formal with me. Victor had not touched the trust. He had simply narrowed the world around me until inconvenience could masquerade as consequence. Mara called it institutional gaslighting. He is trying to make questions feel expensive, she said. She was right, and that was the point. By Wednesday afternoon Mara had the beneficial ownership filing. It was beautifully boring. Public registry, standard disclosure, dry enough to look harmless. But there it was in black and white. Caro Bridge Advisory LLC. Control person, Victor Sterling. Print 2 copies, Mara said. One for the bank and one for the room. You think we are already at the bank stage? Not yet. First we decide whether this is only hidden money or hidden future. Meaning? Meaning men like Victor rarely hide income just to feel clever. They hide it because they are already allocating a later life. I knew she was right before she finished the sentence. That night I searched my own email, the one archive Victor could not revoke without making a scene. The invisible clerical map of our marriage gave me what I needed. A Sutton Place furnishing release billed to Caro Bridge. A legal reserve retainer billed to Caro Bridge. Apartment. Council. Protected fees. My trust is the emergency shield. I called Mara and read the invoice lines aloud. When I finished, she was silent for a second. There it is, she said. That is your asset trace. He was building an exit. Or at minimum a protected fallback. Same emotional crime. He asked me to save the marriage with money he was already using to prepare for life outside it. Yes. What do I do now? I asked. First, you do not sign. Second, you stop arguing with his summary and start dealing only in documents. Third, we take it to the bank before he converts your hesitation into institutional pressure. Thursday morning Victor cornered me in the entry hall while I was reaching for my bag. Alder is holding a window for us at 11, he said. Owen wants the guarantee finalized before the weekend. Then it is good I have questions. He saw something in my face that made him change tactics instantly. Elena. He lowered his voice. Do not humiliate me in front of a bank because you found old operating material and decided it tells a simpler story than it does. If the story is not simple, make it simple. The bridge is for timing. Caro Bridge is for management continuity. The apartment is executive overflow. The retainer is standing counsel. None of that changes the fact that I need my wife beside me when counterparties are testing confidence. Why did the apartment need shell money before the marriage needed honesty? He blinked once. A tiny crack. Then he recovered. Because some things are easier managed through operating vehicles. Like leaving? Like protecting privacy. Whose? Both of ours, if you stop behaving recklessly. There it was again. Not sorrow. Not apology. Threat dressed as stewardship. I am coming to the bank, I said. His shoulders loosened almost imperceptibly. Good. That is not agreement to sign. The looseness vanished. Do not turn this into a spectacle. Then you should have told me the truth in private. Owen Pike's conference room on the 20th floor of Alder Private Bank had gray silk wall panels, a tray of untouched coffee service, and the kind of silence expensive institutions cultivate so clients will hear their own decisions as inevitable. Victor arrived first with Reed Talbot and a leather folder containing the bridge packet. I came with Mara, my own folder, and the kind of calm that only appears once grief has burned through confusion and found purpose on the other side. Owen greeted us all as if we were people attending the same wedding instead of a room full of evidence waiting to acquire consequences. Our understanding, he began, is that today's objective is execution of the contingent support guarantee tied to the Sterling Point Bridge extension. That was the old objective, I said. Victor turned to me with a warning already prepared. Elena. I took the K-1 from my folder and slid it across the table to Owen. My first question, I said, is why Sterling Point Opportunities Fund 3 paid $4.8 million in management fees to Caro Bridge Advisory while I was being told the fund's condition justified contingent exposure against my separate property trust. Reed opened his mouth. We are happy to provide structure context, he said. After he reads the page, Mara replied. Owen read the line quietly. His eyes moved with that banker precision that makes emotion disappear while risk calculation speeds up. And your second document? He asked. I handed him the beneficial ownership filing. Caro Bridge is controlled by Victor Sterling. Victor leaned forward. Control does not equal unrestricted liquidity. No, I said. But it does equal undisclosed related party protection when you ask your wife to guarantee a bridge while shielding the fee stream you did not want her to ask about. Reed reached for the bridge packet as if by touching paper first he could own it. Mara was faster. She opened to Appendix D and turned the binder toward Owen. Protected advisory streams, she said. Named counterparty Caro Bridge. Excluded from the collateral waterfall ahead of any contingent recourse against Mrs. Sterling's trust. Owen read. Once. Then again. The room got colder in the precise way air-conditioned rooms do when money has stopped obeying the person who expected to control it. Mr. Sterling, Owen said, why was a related advisory entity not separately flagged to the contingent guarantor before documentation reached execution? Victor smiled, but too late. Because we are discussing management continuity, not distributable proceeds. That is not my question. He hated when another man refused his framing. I saw it in the way his thumb pressed once against the edge of the leather folder. The entity is within the broader operating structure, he said. There was no intent to mislead. I placed 2 more pages on the table. Then perhaps intent will be easier to discuss with use of proceeds. The Sutton Place furnishing invoice first. The Hale Mercer retainer second. Both billed to Caro Bridge. This is my email archive, I said. Caro Bridge paid for the executive apartment and standing legal reserve while I was being told the marriage needed my trust to survive 90 days of temporary pressure. Reed stiffened. Victor finally lost the expression he wore for television. "Those materials are private," he said. "They were sent to me. Out of administrative habit." So was the truth, apparently. Owen did not look at Victor. He looked only at the documents, which was worse. "I am going to pause this execution process," he said. "Alder will require amended disclosure of related party fee streams, beneficial ownership alignment, and use of proceeds clarification before we can evaluate any guarantor exposure." Victor's head snapped toward him. "We do not need to overreact because my wife is emotional about internal operating segregation." That word. Emotional. It had followed me through half the marriage like a trained animal, loosed whenever precision from me became inconvenient to him. But before I could answer, Owen did it for me. "I am not reacting to emotion, Mr. Sterling. I am reacting to incomplete risk presentation." There are sentences women remember forever not because they save us, but because they prove the room finally heard what we were saying all along. Victor tried one last time. "Owen, with respect, this is a short bridge. We can paper any clarifications without disrupting the extension window." "Not with this guarantor," Owen said. "Mrs. Sterling, for the record, are you withdrawing willingness to provide contingent support?" I kept my voice level. "Yes. The Rhodes Legacy Trust will not support this bridge." Victor turned to me then, fully, with no patience left and no audience instincts capable of rescuing him. "Do you understand what you are doing?" "Yes," I said. For the first time in weeks. The meeting ended the way many expensive collapses do. Not with shouting. With a procedural stop. Reed gathered papers he could no longer arrange into innocence. Victor stood too quickly, said he needed a private word, and did not get one. Mara touched my elbow once, a small signal that I was still inside my own body and not just inside the aftermath. Owen promised written follow-up on the disclosure freeze and walked us to the elevator with the same expression he had worn when we arrived, except now the politeness had moved to my side of the table. In the mirrored elevator doors, Victor and I appeared together and already separate. "You blindsided me," he said. "No," I said. "I read what you sent." He called the records incomplete and accused me of turning complexity into morality. I told him the apartment, the legal reserve, and the protected fees had already done that for me. "No," I said quietly. I turned it into English. By the time I got home, the apartment felt different, as all spaces do once you have seen the blueprint of your own exclusion. The art was the same. The rugs were the same. Victor's books still stood in military order on the study shelves. But the air had changed. Or maybe only I had. He did not come home that night. His assistant texted the next morning to say he was in meetings and would be staying downtown. The message was too formal, too curated, and too professionally detached to be anything but proof that private consequences had already entered the administrative bloodstream. I spent that day with Mara and a divorce lawyer named Judith Hale, who believed in short sentences and clean asset maps. We did not talk first about leaving him. We talked first about preserving the record. "Men like this win when the facts remain decorative," Judith said. "We are going to make them operational." We sent document preservation notices. We locked down every trust record. We mapped the shell, the fee stream, the apartment, the retainer, the bridge attempt, the disclosure failures, and the timeline of the ask. For the first time since the K-1 landed in my hands, I felt something stronger than outrage. I felt organized. Victor called on Sunday. "Are you really doing this?" he asked. "I already did. Over a 90-day bridge and 2 misunderstood invoices? Over the fact that you built protection for yourself before asking me to become your protection." He was quiet. "You are collapsing years of marriage into one ugly interpretation." "No. I am finally reading the footnotes." He exhaled like a man forced to speak to an inferior board. "If this becomes formal, Elena, a lot of people get dragged through material they do not deserve." "You mean disclosure." "I mean damage." "Same thing, if you were counting on darkness." He ended the call without saying goodbye. The separation was not cinematic. It was administrative. Staff were informed. Schedules changed. Lawyers took over where intimacy had failed. Victor moved into the Sutton Place apartment he claimed was only executive overflow. The fee stream became the center of everything because it revealed method: protect the shell, fund the exit, then ask for my trust. Judith called it credibility collapse. Mara called it emotional accounting. He still tried, of course. His formal position was that all protected entities were lawful, all operating distinctions routine, all apartment and council expenses legitimate business administration, and all marital misunderstanding regrettable. That was the version designed for paper. But paper has weaknesses too. It records sequence. And sequence was where he lost me. First the shell was protected. Then the apartment was funded. Then the legal reserve was paid. Then my trust was asked to stand behind his emergency. That is not confusion. That is choreography. When Judith put it that way during settlement negotiations, even Reed stopped pretending the issue was merely interpretive. Victor and I met once more in person before terms were finalized. Not in a bank this time. In Judith's conference room, under flatter light, with fewer illusions available to the furniture. He looked tired. Not broken. Men like Victor do not break where you can enjoy it. But tired in the way control grows tired once it has to keep restaging itself. "You could have handled this privately," he said while the lawyers stepped out to exchange revised schedules. "I asked you privately. You decided the worst possible meaning was the true one." "No. I decided the version that matched the documents was the one I could survive." He leaned back and studied me as if I were the mispriced asset of his adult life. "Do you know what is extraordinary?" he said. "I built a life where you never had to worry about ordinary things. And in return, the one-time complexity required trust, you chose suspicion." I almost laughed. "No, Victor. You built a life where I was not supposed to notice which ordinary things had your name on them and which risks had mine." His mouth hardened. "You always needed things translated into morality. Because you always translated morality into structure." The lawyers came back in before he could answer. In the end, the settlement was not romantic and not dramatic. It was precise, which is the closest thing to justice wealthy marriages often get. The Rhodes Legacy Trust remained untouched and explicitly confirmed as separate property. Additional advisory income tied to Caro Bridge and related flows was brought into the disclosure matrix that drove negotiations. The apartment funding, reserve payments, and omitted related party protection language were accounted for in the final economic picture rather than dismissed as private noise. Victor retained what the law and contracts still allowed him to retain. I retained what he had tried hardest to make symbolic and therefore reachable. My future stopped being available as proof of his stability. That mattered more than any single number. I moved 3 months later into a pre-war apartment on the Upper West Side. It was not a trophy place or a revenge place. It was a place where every expense, every title, and every lock sat inside a reality no husband could narrate over. The first thing I unpacked was my mother's trust binder. Cream tabs. Clean copies. Signed pages. Boring language. Life-saving force. When Mara came by that Sunday and asked how it felt, I told her, like I stopped volunteering to be misunderstood. "Good," she said. Victor called once more before the divorce was final. I almost ignored it. Curiosity answered for me. "I suppose you feel vindicated," he said. He sounded composed again. He had found a new script. "No," I said. "I feel accurate." That irritated him more than anger would have. "You still think this was about money?" "It was about sequencing. You protected yourself first and called it marriage. That is reductive. That is the sentence." He was quiet long enough that I wondered, not for the first time, whether powerful men ever hear themselves clearly once a woman stops echoing them back in polished form. "I did love you," he said at last. I believed him. That was the tragedy, not the loophole. He loved me in the way men like Victor love women they do not expect to challenge the architecture. He loved my steadiness. My language. My usefulness. My ability to make rooms easier for him. He may even have loved my mind, as long as it kept serving his version of order. But love that asks for your signature while hiding its own protected exits is not love safe enough to build on. "Maybe you did," I said. "But you wanted my trust more than my truth." He did not answer that. Neither did I. After we hung up, I took the K-1 from the binder where I had kept a copy for myself. People think the most important documents in a woman's life are the glamorous ones. Sometimes they are. But sometimes the page that saves you is the ugly one, the one men assume you will not read because it is too technical to threaten them. The K-1 did not scream. It simply told the truth. My mother used to say safety is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of something that still belongs to you after conflict has exposed everyone. For a while I thought she meant the trust. She did, partly. She also meant the discipline of asking the plain question after the polished answer. He wanted my signature more than my forgiveness. I kept the first. And stopped needing the second.